Okay, chapter 23 and 24. We'll take these two together. We're at the Bolkonskys at Bald Hills. And I've been thinking about this a little bit longer, a little bit more than some of the previous chapters, trying to get a handle on the old man Bolkonsky. And people are paradoxes. We have this capacity, at least we think we do, to kind of set our own course and determine who we are and make free choices, and so to speak. But there's also the context and the environment and where we grew up and the conditions and experiences we had that completely condition who we are. And so in this way, I wonder about the old man in this way, but I still find it hard to muster much empathy for him, especially in comparison to his son. His son is sort of similar to his father in some ways, but it's not hardened yet. In the father Bolkonsky, we see this hardened version of an old man, and we see some similar properties in Andrei, but with some significant differences, which makes me much more empathetic to him. And so we have Prince Andrei and Liza come and arrive at the estate. And he arrives there, and Prince Andrei, he kind of meets the main man of the household and asks about his father, and it's like he checks his watch and kind of affirms to himself his father. He knows his father to be this very routine, strict-oriented guy, and he checks his watch. Yep, nothing's changed. He's the same old guy, and so he kind of smiles to himself about this. And you get Maria and Liza greeting each other with a lot of warmth and sincerity, and I don't doubt that at all, but you wonder if these are two women. In Maria's case, she's isolated here, and in Lisa's case, she seems to be on her way to be isolated here, and so there might be a little bit of psychological preservation going on there of them both just hoping that they could be friends. But it's a very kind greeting, and again, Andrei, in talking to Maria, he asks about his father. The same schedule, the same walks in the avenues, the same lathe, asked Prince Andrei with a barely perceptible smile, which showed that in spite of all his love and respect for his father, he understood his weaknesses. And so Prince Andrei himself in his own mind thinks himself as different. He respects his father, but he sees himself as different, even though we can see some similarities as well. And a little while later, the appointed time comes, and the old man comes out, and he sees his son. And fairly soon, this old man's, one of his favorite pastimes is just criticizing the current generation, especially the politicians and the war generals and that. This is his thing, and I find this interesting. We see that today with how rapidly society and culture is changing, and how it's not always the case, but it can be very difficult for older generations to adapt, and can very easily fall into a criticizing voice, how poorly things are going. But this is the same thing that's happening back here with this fellow. He's just criticizing the current generation of generals and the situation with Bonaparte. And it's just another point to see the kind of the hardening of an identity in this old prince. Remember, he was exiled. He was like literally exiled to Bald Hills because he just like could not. He just could not get along with the new emperor Paul for a time. And even when that ban was lifted, he's like, I don't need people anyway. So we just keep getting this sense of this man, this kind of immovable man. And this sort of keeps getting shown to us in different ways. At the dinner table, there's this fellow, the prince's architect, who's just a worker for the prince, but for some strange reason he's allowed to come and he sits with them, with the family at dinner. And for the old prince, this is a demonstration, as if he's trying to present to his children, hey, all men are equal. See, I have this guy here. But this is like, I read this as complete self-delusion. I mean, like, the only purpose of that man being there is for this prince himself to reinforce his ideas as if they were progressive, liberal, cultural, smart, intellectual ideas. And so you can twist anything you want to reinforce your idea, but I kind of see it more as a psychological weakness. I don't think anyone's fooled. And Prince Andrei, just on his way to come to dinner, he passes through this hallway where there's this genealogical tree and paintings of people, and he kind of scoffs at it. And again, I think he's scoffing at his father, sort of grasping for some sense of stature. And again, you sort of see there's a difference between Prince Andrei, or at least that Prince Andrei is wanting to establish between him and his father, of there being a difference, of which in Prince Andrei, he's sort of seen some futileness into it. He certainly respects the intelligence of his father, but just the patterns of his life he finds to be lacking as well. And Princess Maria is kind of surprised at this response from Andrei, and she's shocked. And it says here, everything her father did inspired in her a reverence, admitting of no criticism. And again, this is another sort of self-delusion, I think. So in this way, we can say Princess Maria and her father, even though they're completely opposite people, in this way, they kind of have this similar psychological pattern, as all people sort of do. For the father, it's these routines and structures and ideas and philosophies of which there can be no changing anymore for him. And Princess Maria, in her psychological way of coping with life, she's reverted to her faith, and a key tenet of that is to sort of bear the cross of her circumstances and almost oddly not be critical of her father, even though she bears the brunt of much of his displeasure and impatience and unkindness. And so in this way, I sort of see, as at least as it is currently, Prince Andrei's sort of, he has his faults to be sure, and he definitely has these patterns as his father, but at the moment they're not hardened. He has this capacity to also think a little bit freer. It doesn't mean he's the kindest, most gentle guy around, by no means. We see how he's treated his wife, but in this way I feel more optimistic about Pierre, for sure, very much more compared to his father. And then we get the dinner happening, and it's just this cold, kind of awkward, not very warm situation, all dominated by by the father. And you just compare this to, say, the Rostovs or even Anna Pavlovna's situation at the beginning of the book. Just the liveliness, the warmth, the interaction, and the freedom of interaction. But here it's just like a very constrained, very cold feeling. And Lisa's there. You'll kind of engages her in conversation a little bit, but it's just, again, just for show. He's doesn't really seem he's interested in her at all. She does kind of liven up and starts talking to answer his questions, but you can see he's kind of like, he really doesn't want to engage with her. And so he turns and starts again talking about military matters with Andrei. And there's a sentence here: the old prince appeared not to only be convinced that all these personages were childlessly incapable, and he's talking about the generals and military commanders that are currently in charge of things, and also Napoleon by extension. They were childish and incapable of understanding so much as the ABCs of statesmanship and military affairs. So he's just like, it's just going back to his old horse. It's kind of like, how stupid people are nowadays. And you can just imagine, you know, him not getting off this soapbox. Why it kind of like, the ruler said, just get out of here. You know, the emperor's it's like, you're of no help whatsoever. And Prince Andrei, he's kind of plays with his father a little bit for his own amusement. He kind of goads him on, and he mentions, oh, but even remember that famous general of your generation, Suvorov, that everybody admires. Even he had to retreat that one time against the French. And this sets the old man off. He just, which was Andrei's purpose again for his, he's sort of bemused by this in his father, even though he respects him. So he sees himself as different. I think the respect comes, he knows his father's intelligent in certain respects of past military matters, maybe current things like mathematics, geometry, these type of things, his industriousness. But it's mixed also with this sort of other sense, this kind of meta sense, of which in Prince Andrei's mind, yeah, but my father, he has mistakes, and he's stuck in his ways, and he has these hobby horses. And Prince Andrei is not at all abashed to say his opinion. He says directly to his father, I cannot understand how you can have such an opinion of Bonaparte. You may laugh as much as you like, but Bonaparte is a great general. So he says this to his father's face. He's like, and this kind of echoes to me remember back at Anna Pavlovna's, where he comes to Pierre's aid. Everybody's attacking Pierre. Pierre has this point of view. And he comes to Pierre's aid, defending him, but he's not fully of an extreme opinion. He says, you know, there's some things of Bonaparte we should really admire when he did this and this and this. But you know, not everything makes sense. And so he seemed to have a balanced opinion there. And here with his father, he's sort of able to converse with him, but not at all going along with all that his father is saying. Even though we know this guy, this old man, to be this very demanding person, yet he seems to extend much more graciousness to Pierre than maybe he does his daughter Maria. And so this old man, he's kind of, you know, again, he's trying to educate Maria. And so there's this sense of him being this kind of progressive man in a culture where many women maybe don't get educated. And so there's this sense where you could tell yourself this story. Hey, I'm ahead of the game here. Of anyone here, I'm the smartest, I'm the most progressive. But again, this is a self-delusion, because what's the education he's given her? It's his own education, it's his own version of it, and his own methods, which is only causing her distress. And so there's kind of these identity structures, these patterns of thought, built and built and built, and something we can't see in ourselves. And so this whole chapter is just this interaction between these. And the prince proceeded to analyze all the blunders which, in his opinion, Bonaparte had made in his campaigns. His son did not contradict him at this time. This is a little later, after he praised Bonaparte, Prince Andrei did. His son did not contradict him, but it was evident that whatever the argument might be, he was as little able as his father to alter his opinion. And so here's the common theme. In the old man, the father, man, you couldn't convince him of even the tiniest thing to change his mind. And there's this similar thing in Prince Andrei, but as I view him, it's not a hardened thing. You know, he's willing to talk if he sees and hears. Someone, I think, could still change Prince Andrei's mind on things if there needs to be some sort of respect and admiration of the other person talking to him, whereas you don't get that sense with his father. And so there's this interaction in the family, and I guess I find it hard to really cheer for the old man. I feel him to be just like one of those old men that has strong opinions, likes to think of themselves as being much smarter than they are, and just the influence this has on both Prince Maria and Prince Andrei, and how they're trying to manage their own lives and psychologically cope in their own way. And remember, the mother is missing, and that for sure would have had an influence on their upbringing. But that brings that chapter to a close. Chapter 23 and 24.